Yeah, the journey was not a straight line. I'll spare some of the details, but I grew up I say in, but I wasn't in the business. I worked in the cheese factory every summer growing up, but I was never in a real operating role. So I was influenced by Sargento significantly, and got a lot of pressure to go into it, and really struggled with the decision: should I be a part of this or not? And is that for me, Tommy? Is like, where is God calling me? We're a Catholic family. While we didn't grow up kind of hardcore Catholic, we had a deep faith and still do. And for me, it was trying to figure out, where's that call and where am I being led. And went to Notre Dame undergrad, and had always thought about being a Catholic priest. And I liked girls. I played football at Notre Dame. Like, you don't go to the seminary after that. Like, I was a tough guy. And while I was a punter, I still kind of fancied myself a tough guy.
We'll call you Rudy. How about that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was a walk-on. So anyhow, I struggled with this decision of like, dude, is it Sargento? Is it somewhere else? And finally I got to the point about 7 years after undergrad where I was like, if I don't go to the seminary and explore this call, I'm going to really regret it. And I'm going to be a lousy leader for all of the employees. Like, if my heart's not in it, that's not good for the community or any of my family, myself, or any of our employees. So,
all right, today's guest, Josh Gentine, is someone that I connected with on LinkedIn because I read an article of his, and the article was titled Family Office Participation, Creating a Plan to Protect Your Family and Your Assets. And so for me personally, in my journey with helping families, it resonated with me in terms of what Josh put out there, and wanted to bring Josh onto the podcast to really talk about why this article meant so much to him in terms of writing it and sharing it with his viewers, but also like, what is it in his work that he does personally, as well as on the business side with Bench, is the consulting firm that he created. So again, I just want to bring Josh on. Josh, welcome to the podcast.
thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So we'll just jump in, and just again, that article for me is something that I shared on LinkedIn and just got us connected just through traditional networking, and just wanted to bring you on. So tell us about the article and why you wrote it.
Yeah. The article, I do a lot of work with enterprising families, and if I when I talk about enterprising families, it's a family that has an operating company, might be a family office, might be multiple family operating companies, but in looking at family businesses and family enterprises, one of the challenges that we see so often is conflict. Of course, shocker, right? Family, but family conflict, I look at it in kind of two ways. There's this human, social, emotional element to family conflict that goes back to resentment around what you got at Christmas, and I mean, you name it, right? It's all that baggage, and there's a lot of structural issues that lead to conflict. And if I think about structural issues, it's roles, responsibilities, expectations, and being clear about all of that. And so this article that I wrote was really about the families that are participating in the enterprise in some capacity. And whether you're the CEO, you're an employee, and you're building leadership skills to eventually take over, without expectations, without clarity around how that process operates, it can lead to unmet expectations, which leads to conflict. And so when we're working with clients, we're constantly drilling into, where is there conflict? Why is that friction there? And are there system structures that we can put in place in addition to dealing with the human, social, emotional? Are there systems and structures and sort of processes that we can put in place to help mitigate some of the conflict? And Tommy, our family business, Sargento Foods, which was started back in '53, still family owned, and I say family operated. We have one family member in the third generation, which is my generation, who's back there. My cousin Louie, who's our CEO. And we put a plan in place many years ago, our first iteration of what we call our family participation plan. We put in place many, many years ago. And it was really to clarify the expectations for us, our generation, if we ever got involved in the business. And it was everything from how do you enter the business? Will we create roles for family members? Will we not create roles? What is the education and sort of employment experience that you have to come in? Once you're in, what is that experience going to look like? We laid that all out in a very clear plan and policy. So we all knew the rules of the game. If we're going to come back and work in the family business and be a part of the Sargento family of employees, what was that going to look like, and what were the expectations? And I think it did a lot to help mitigate conflict between our Gen 2 and Gen 3. And it also sent a signal to employees that we take our ownership very seriously. This is not getting a role as a family member at a Sargento or a family member at any enterprise. It's not a right. It's a privilege and it's a responsibility. And I think by putting policy in place around what that looks like does a really good job for and helps ease the burden for the leading generation, the succeeding generation, and it helps clarify things for employees, which is a really important signal for the organization.
No, that's awesome to hear. And I have so many questions when you just kind of went through that. And my first question is,
Yeah.
who is the champion on the family side of that process? Is it the G3 in your situation? Was it your G2, your parents and your fathers that said, we
Yeah.
need to have the rules of the road here, rules of engagement? Who who kind of started that conversation, and then who championed it through? Because it
Yeah.
seems like, again, back to unexpected, uncommunicated expectations. Who was that person that
Yeah.
led that process?
Yeah, the first plan that we put in place 25, 30 years ago, that was my Uncle Lou, who was our CEO at the time, as well as my dad and his brothers who were a part of the business. There were really three of the brothers who were actively involved in the business at that point, and I think they all recognized the challenges. They got along very well, but I also know that there had to be plenty of tension-filled moments as three brothers trying to operate this business. So they were really the early champions, and they brought in a guy, Dean Fowler, who's a mentor of mine, and helped do all of our family business consulting work at Sargento. Dean came in and helped guide them through that process and put that one together. And the process, Tommy, I think really begins to build critical mass around the enthusiasm around the plan. And I can go into a family business and help, let's call it dad build a family participation plan for the family. But if a family doesn't buy into that, they don't agree with the tenets of the plan, it's not going to hold any water. It's not worth the paper that it's written on. And so it really becomes a family exercise, and it becomes a family exercise around values, what matters, why are we doing this together? What's the signal that we want to send to all of our stakeholders about our responsibility as owners at the end of the day? So, well, I think my dad and his brothers were the early champions. I think Louis certainly as our CEO. Me doing this work for other families. I'm constantly a champion of this work for all of our clients, of just putting a policy in place that no matter what that looks like, but more so getting the family involved and behind the entire project, because everyone's going to understand then going forward, this is why we're doing it. And if you can explain the why and you can buy into the why behind the policy, it's going to hold, it's going to stick.
Yeah, and this applies to businesses that are, $1 million business valuations to $100 million, right? These are concepts that I think anyone that's listening today can really put in place for their family. And so when we work with family businesses, and you've experienced it both then as an advisor, as someone living in the family, and I've seen it as an advisor,
Yeah.
there's more emotion that goes into the conversations with families. And the question I have for you is, as you do this work, does does this message need to also be supported at home, so that you can't have these two different worlds of the business front and how we operate here if the house is not in order as well, right? And so is your work, does it also transfer to the house, to the kitchen table, and how people communicate at the table and their family versus the business? Because the business tends to be more, I would say, KPI driven and there's numbers,
Yeah.
but the emotional part at home is, I think,
Yes.
is much more important. So how does that work?
You're absolutely right. Nothing more to say. No. 100%. We often talk about the four room model. I wish I could say I created the framework, but I didn't. If anyone that goes and picks up the Family Business Handbook, Josh Barron and team put together a great resource, and they talk about the four room model. And the four room model, you've got your family room, you've got your owner's room, boardroom, and management room. And in some ways, you want those rooms distinct and different. You want to know, am I a board member because I'm in the boardroom and I'm wearing my board hat, or am I in the family room and I'm wearing my family hat? And working through these different rooms and how they operate and how they kind of integrate back and forth is really important. And what I often talk about with clients is if that family room is not in a good place, it's really hard to get the rest of the house in order. And so, yes, we can sit down and talk about a family participation plan. We can talk about how we're going to operate at the business level. But the reality is, family members need to learn how to communicate effectively. They need to know one another. They need to know what motivates them and drives them. And Tommy, I think it's fascinating that in sort of the corporate world, the leadership development training space is, let's call it a $50 billion industry. And so we devote tons of investment towards making sure that colleagues know how to have crucial conversations and colleagues understand each other's personality styles and are you a red versus a blue and so on and so forth. And I used to do this at Deloitte. I mean, I was a human capital consultant doing integrations, and we were doing culture studies and what makes a great meeting. None of that happens in families.
Yeah.
And so much of our work, while it is focused on the family enterprise and alignment and governance and succession planning and so on and so forth, we start at the family level. We start by getting family members to know one another at a deeper level, to be able to articulate what they actually want, and to articulate the fact that they may not know what they want. And it's amazing. My colleague Shannon and I were just down working with a family in Florida last week, 2-day family workshop. The first day was just focused on their personalities. It was a personality workshop and talking about how they were showing up and talking about some of the challenges they had leading this enterprise, as well as just being family members in the room together. And I won't speak for them, but they talked about the transformative nature of that work and the fact that they've never sat down and talked about what does it mean to be family ever.
Mm.
And families don't. And especially once kids go off to college, we don't know each other as well as we used to. And we base all of our go forward assumptions on what it was like in the past, recognizing that we're all evolving over time. And so I think it's really important for families to invest in themselves, invest in communication, invest in spending time together, because without that, you might have the best enterprise in the world, but if your family is quote unquote dysfunctional and can't get along and can't figure out how to navigate things constructively together, it makes the rest of it really, really difficult and just not that fun. And the reality is a family enterprise is a blessing on so many levels, and it should be a blessing and a way for a family to get stronger, closer, to stay tethered together through this common bond and these values and this thing that's been created by a family founder. And when they do that well, employees feel it, the family feels it. So it starts with the family. It starts with investing and communicating as a family.
Yeah, it's fascinating because there is so much in the wealth management space, so many different advisors at every level for whatever design strategy you want to implement. But it's the family dynamics that I think a lot of people try to play in that space and try to pretend, but it really takes people like yourself that have seen it, been it, that are, I would say
Yeah.
you're living it with what you do at Chapel Hill in terms of the courses that you are behind, but also at bench and even at your family,
Yeah.
right? I think you bring it from all the different angles, and that's why I really wanted to bring you on and just kind of delve deep into this because
Yeah.
most of my practice is almost psychology. Even though I'm a trained CPA, tax, finance guy, most of the conversations you're sitting there talking about this proverbial train coming down the tracks that's going to hit the family, and they're like, "We don't care about that. We care about what
Yeah.
happened last night at dinner." And it's like, oh man, like I don't have time because this clock is ticking, and eventually you let to have the family get hit by the train. That's like you said, a silver lining, blessing in disguise because it forces the conversation around this asset, this enterprise. And so when you talk with families, I think that the challenge for me is that we always focus on the wealth, the numbers, and all that. But does the conversation go deeper than that and starts to go to those childhood trauma issues that Susie, when she was 9 years old, had the piece of cake first before I got my cut, even though it was my birthday and I blew out the candles. Does it get to that level where it's these you're unwrapping a lot of these emotions that have nothing to do with money, but money was what brought them to the table to
Hmm.
start that? Does that make sense? That kind of
It
like
does.
how you think about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I don't lead with it when I'm talking to potential clients. I often talk about it in settings like this. And one of the reasons why I do this work is I think we get to help build better families and we use their balance sheet as the way in. They wouldn't be at the table if it weren't for that balance sheet. And do we get into the cake resentment? We try not to get that granular, but if the family needs to go there to process it, we can go there. And I think there's a difference in some ways. I'm certified coach, ICF, and all the rest. And um, I do look at our work a little bit like coaching, where we need to acknowledge and respect the fact of the past and what has happened and what's there. How is that showing up? And at the same time, if I think about it from an enterprise perspective, we don't have time to sit in therapy and unpack everything because decisions need to be made. Estate plans need to be put in place. And so it's helping them navigate the past while also keeping an eye on where do we need to go? What's the timeline? How do we do this? And what are the tools that we can use together going forward to have a healthier relationship in the future? And sometimes that works, Tommy, and sometimes that doesn't. And I am an eternal optimist. I go into every engagement thinking there's an opportunity to bring this family together, to find common bonds, to find a way to help them navigate the future collectively. Um, However, in my experiences, I've also learned that that's not always feasible. And when that's not feasible, the goal is how can we have a constructive conversation about the differences and the fact that we want to go in different ways? And then how do we structure around that to make sure that ultimately the stakeholders of that enterprise, or whether it's an operating company or again a family office, the stakeholders aren't impacted in a significant way. If I look at Sargento, if our family baggage gets in the way, we've got 2,700 employees who rely on us making good decisions and being responsible adults who can navigate challenging family dynamics. We've got, it's the community, it's our employees who rely on us, to show up the right way. And so, try to keep our eye on that while navigating some of the real tricky stuff underneath. And if we can do that, I think ultimately it can be good for the family and for the enterprise.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I want to jump in then to the bench and why you
Yeah.
created bench and move into that. And I would say one anecdote. I remember sitting across from a G1, a founder, and said, do you understand the impact you've had? And this was right after a liquidity event of an
Mm,
operating business within his portfolio. I said the impact that you've had on people. He's like, what do you mean by that? I said, how many houses have you purchased? How many kids have you put through college? How many cars have you financed? How many
yeah.
houses? And he's like, I never thought about that way, right? And as we look at succession of a business within a family, you look at succession amongst, to your point, the other stakeholders, the employees, the vendors, suppliers, customers, right? It's a more to me, a lot of people are depending on these businesses, and we have to help families understand that their impact is beyond the dollars. It's providing livelihoods for people. And so
Yeah.
it's interesting when you break it down like that with individuals. And
Yeah.
but let's talk about bench. You
Yeah.
created it for obvious reasons. Um, and when you set off on creating bench and what now since inception you've kind of witnessed happen, are there things that you first set off that, oh, now you're like, I wish I started that, 2, 3 years earlier or 5 years earlier because there's such a demand for it? Or are there trends that have evolved where it's like, I've changed my offering because this is actually more impactful. Going into it was thinking this, but now that I've kind
Yeah.
of gone through the process, this is what. So I just want to understand your journey with Bench.
Yeah, the journey was not a straight line. I'll spare some of the details, but I grew up I say in, but I wasn't in the business. I worked in the cheese factory every summer growing up, but I was never in a real operating role. So I was influenced by Sargento significantly and got a lot of pressure to go into it, and really struggled with the decision: should I be a part of this or not? And is that for me, Tommy? Is like, where is God calling me? We're a Catholic family. While we didn't grow up kind of hardcore Catholic, we had a deep faith and still do. And for me, it was trying to figure out, where's that call and where am I being led. And went to Notre Dame undergrad, and had always thought about being a Catholic priest. And I liked girls. I played football at Notre Dame. Like, you don't go to the seminary after that. Like, I was a tough guy. And
Yeah.
while I was a punter, I still kind of fancied myself a tough guy.
We'll call you
But
Rudy. How about that?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, I was a walk on. So anyhow, I struggled with this decision of like, is it Sargento? Is it somewhere else? And finally, I got to the point about 7 years after undergrad where I was like, if I don't go to the seminary and explore this call, I'm going to really regret it, and I'm going to be a lousy leader for all of the employees. Like, if my heart's not in it, that's not good for the community or any of my family, myself, or any of our employees. So I ended up getting my MBA first, down at Chapel Hill, and then I went back to Notre Dame to be a Catholic priest. And after my first year there, came to this very clear, like, beautiful moment of grace. Like, this is not where I'm being called. So I ended up calling Deloitte and a girl I met in North Carolina, and got engaged and got a job. And ended up spending a number of years with Deloitte doing M&A and a lot of governance decision rights kind of work, not recognizing just how transferable and important that is to family enterprises. While I was with Deloitte, I started coaching, and I had this external client who had a big family company, and he basically was like, "Hey, can you help us build all the stuff that you guys have at Sargento for us?" And in doing that work for his family, I fell in love with just being with the family on their journey, trying to help them navigate the stuff that I had been through, and the big pressures that I had experienced. And so I eventually said, this is the call. This is where I want to be spending my time, the vocation. So I eventually left Deloitte and started working with families full time. And the evolution of our practice, I would say, like a lot of family business consultants, you're asked to create governance. You're asked to come in and say, hey, help us navigate this. And the reality is, that governance, the estate plan, the whatever it is, that kind of, I think about it in the top of the tree, it starts at the roots. And unless we deal with the roots of the tree, and the tree, if we think about the roots being the individuals, and kind of the trunk is the family system, if those aren't healthy, I don't care what we do up here. It's never gonna matter to anyone. There's still going to be conflict, and yes, they might have great returns, and they might figure out, their estate plan and so forth. But there's sort of a bloody wake in the process. And so I started out doing governance, and what I realized very quickly is that I can't do that work unless I go back to what I was talking about earlier, till we know the family members. And until, in our work with the family, I understand, who are you, Tommy? What makes you tick? What drives you? What are your motivations? What do you want? And then getting you to articulate that to everybody else in the room, in a safe place, and in kind of a platform of trust, the nest, right? So what we do now is all of a it was really a manifestation and a reality that, like, hey, this work doesn't work unless you're dealing with the humans at the table and their fears, their desires, the things that really matter most to them. And so in our evolution, we've really started to focus more and more on that. And if we can get that right and we can help a family navigate that, the rest of it is, I'm not going to say pretty easy, but a lot easier. There's still a lot of complexity to tax strategy and corporate governance and everything else. But if we've got that good foundation, the rest of the house, per se, if we go back to the 4-room model, the rest of the house is pretty sound and will function a lot easier. In terms of industry trends, we all know about the great wealth transfer, right? I mean, that is a reality. I'm seeing it in our practice. Everyone I talk to is seeing it. The question is, what are we going to do with it and about it? And I go back to the balance sheet comment. The balance sheet for the next generation is going to grow exponentially over the next 20 years. And so how are they thinking about it? How are they understanding what that wealth means? And more importantly, perhaps, is who are they? What do they want? And how do they use that in a way that is going to be fulfilling for them? And it's amazing how you can always see when somebody from a ultra high net worth family or a big family enterprise, they haven't really figured out what's going on here and how they want to operate and who they want to be. The wealth thing becomes a challenge and a struggle. And if they have figured that out, it's a lot easier. I will say I didn't figure it out for a long time. And so sort of the wealth dynamic for myself was very fuzzy. It was confusing. I made bad investments because I didn't know where the hell I was going. Um, and this next generation of wealth receivers will have some very big decisions that they have to make. And so I think spending, for us, it's like, how can we touch as many families as possible and help them navigate these things so that the wealth is not a burden, but it is a blessing at the end of the day.
Yeah. And that's a challenging conversation with families because, you know, I this word and this word is an interesting word, curse. People sometimes tell me this
Yeah.
is a curse. This success that which is great over the past 40 years of what we create as a family is great, but I've had family members tell me this is not fun. There's too many limitations on me spending money on certain passion projects that are meaningful to me because people in the room say that's not part of your asset allocation. That's too much money being allocated. And it's like, if people want to put money to good use because it's part of who they are, and why are we limiting that? And it's definitely important to be helping these families understand that the sky's the
Yeah.
limit in terms of what you can do, and there's people out there that can help. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you is, as we're talking about this transition, baby boomers and this great wealth transfer, I've growing up in my practice and many 20 plus years in public accounting, a lot of the next generations have not wanted the business. They just wanted the assets on their personal balance sheets and be as liquid as possible and be passive in terms of just being in the stock market. Are you seeing a lot of next generations wanting to keep the business within the family, not only like maybe operating it as their founders' parents were, or putting in professional leadership, or are they looking to just divest and just sell out? Like, is there a difference of opinion about that right now, or changes in how people look at that?
I I haven't seen any patterns. I think if I were to dig deep into the family dynamics, I could probably pull out some patterns pretty quickly, but I would say broad stroke at the macro level, no. I think um, I see both. We will get calls from family members saying, "I think we want to sell this thing. It's time to just sort of de-risk this investment and go our separate ways." And for others, they're saying, "No, we let's double down. This is important. Um, we don't want to run it like our grandfather or father or mother, whoever it might be. We do want to operate this differently. We do want to de-risk this in some way, shape, or form and think through kind of that growth, liquidity control tension and how we're going to manage distributions versus reinvestment in the business." So it's both. I will say that I think the next generation, which is, these are individuals in their uh, 50 on down that are all part of the next generation. I think many of them recognize the importance of outside leadership and outside executives coming in to help them operate the business. I think this we talk a lot about this idea of moving from family business to business family. And so if we think about this family operating company, and let's just take a small Sargento cheese or Sargento Foods, the idea that like the family members are making all the decisions. It's very centralized in that way. Moving and that being the family business, moving to the business family, it's how are we bringing in outside talent? How are we thinking about scale? How are we thinking about risk? How are we thinking about all of these dynamics and recognizing that, hey, maybe we're not the one to run this thing, but the employees want this to continue as a family operating company. We want to keep it as a family operating company, and we're going to continue to do that because we think it's best for the employees, the community, our family, so on and so forth. But we need to find outside leaders who buy into the vision, the mission, the values that we stand for as a family. And when you can do that, it's beautiful. And Tommy, I look at Sargento. The reality is we had I think 17 of us cousins in our generation. My cousin Louie is the only one who's back in an operating role at the family business. Everybody else is an outside non-family executive who's come in, and they have done more for our business than I think our family could have done for our business. And we recognized that early. We recognized, I think my dad and his brothers, Lou in particular as our CEO, probably recognized that that is uncomfortable at times, but it's also necessary. And family members are not scalable. You need to, if you're going to go from here to here, you've got to have great talent, and it's hard to develop that inside this just family ecosystem. You got to go to the outside, and so those that are embracing it, I think, recognize that we can have, in some ways, our cake and eat it too. We can continue to maintain the ownership of this enterprise and serve in a capacity just like I'm doing on the board of directors, but I'm not in an operating capacity or operating role. They can find that balance, and I think that's a win-win.
Yeah, I think the conversations I've had with Next Gen has been about your involvement doesn't have to mirror what your mother or father were, right? You don't have to be an owner
Yeah.
operator like they were, and that's okay. And it's a beautiful thing about these conversations. Whatever plan you want to do, if it's divesting of an asset, if it's staying in the business, there's no right way, wrong way of doing it. It's
No.
up to you, and we support you for either direction. But I think the hard part is the complexities that go with these families is there's the operating piece, right? And so they have to make a decision. Do I want to be an owner operator or more of an informed owner type and sitting at the board? And then you start including, we won't even talk about this, the trust structures and all those things
Mm-hmm.
and trustees and fiduciary responsibilities, which is just mind boggling how much complexity people who are not in this world that are forced into this world. And I think that back to your point of, helping families understand where they want to be and what the roles they want to have. And maybe it's just like you said, of your 16 cousins and siblings in this generation, they have to communicate what they want. And again, there's no right way or wrong way, and no one's going to look down upon you if you participate or don't participate. But no, it's a very and I think for me when I talk to families, it's again there's no wrong way or right way in how you approach this, and it's just based on what you want. And I've seen it where
Yeah.
I equate you to I'm gonna label you now. I'm gonna equate you to like a Bruce Wayne Enterprises, right? You have this Sargento cheese, corporation and all the family behind you, but you're doing something with your life and the calling you have. And I think all of us have this. We're in the space of family offices and working with families. It's a calling of service, right? We're here to serve other people, and though you might not be on Sundays in front of the congregation, we're serving families in a different manner, right? And so the Bruce Wayne
I
world, the way I equate that to you is because you're
love it.
doing good work,
Yeah.
regardless of the calling that you originally thought, and that's refreshing
I
to see.
I often joke about the fact that while I'm not a priest, I'm 70% pastor, 30% strategist in my role. And yeah, it's more often what they need is kind of the pastoral side, and strategy has to be there. There's complexity. You need amazing advisors helping navigate millions, hundreds of millions, and billions of dollars. That has to be there. And I think families need to invest in each other, as I said earlier. I think that is so important because that's what makes the fruits of all of that labor actually worth it and fun to be a part of it. Yeah.
So let's dive a little deeper into what Bench does. And the one thing that
Hmm.
in researching the work that you guys do, the boot camp is something that is, to your point, is that investing in the people and the families. And help us understand more about your thoughts about creating the boot camp and what is the essence of why you've created that.
Yeah, I think it goes to our core practice. I kind of look at it in three buckets: succession or alignment, succession, and conflict. And if we think about alignment, it is, do we want to keep this business? Do we not want to keep this business? Sell it, split it, keep it. If we're going to keep it, how do we do that constructively together? And how do we build governance around that? And whether it's the family participation plan, the shareholder agreement, building a board of directors, which we've been working on with probably half of our clients. There's a lot that goes into that whole alignment piece, as well as those dynamics of like growing the business versus liquidity. And how do you balance that? And how do you figure that out between multiple branches, multiple generations, so on and so forth. Succession planning, how do we navigate all of those things? And then conflict, as as we talked about earlier, that human, social, emotional, as well as the structural. And in doing this work with families, oftentimes we see families who they're not ready. And they're not ready either emotionally, financially, from a time commitment, whatever it might be. They're not ready for, let's call it, full scaling consulting work. And so the idea behind the boot camp was to provide sort of a 2-day intensive for families who aren't there yet, who aren't ready to make the big financial commitment. And it's work. I mean, we're gonna be sitting down with family members and talking about vision and purpose and what do you want and how do we bring this all together. It's not a light lift. And so those that aren't ready necessarily for that, we wanted to have an opportunity for them to learn a lot about this, to start to tee up the questions, to help them build sort of their framework for thinking through what does it mean to be family with this enterprise. And so the boot camps are designed for that. What we have found, interestingly enough, Tommy, in talking to families about the boot camps, is once we start to talk to them about what we're talking about, the concepts that we're presenting, and what they'll be going through as a part of those, more of often than not, they're saying, actually, can we just work with you and do consulting? So I frankly had a hard time building the boot camps. I'm getting more clients on the consulting side because I think they begin to recognize that this is if we're going to do this, we need to do this right, and it's an investment, and now's the time. So that was the genesis of it. It really stemmed from our broader work and hoping to, in some ways, democratize this practice, because I think for me, that vocation, that call, is to help as many families as I possibly can navigate this. And if there is a nugget that comes out of a talk where they say, actually, you know what, I need to go talk to my dad or mom, I need to have this conversation, like, God bless it. That's like, I love that. I love that. And whether we end up doing full scale consulting work for them or not, if their family is engaging in that work as a family, beautiful. So we're just trying to get the word out and help as many families as we possibly can. And unfortunately, I'm not scalable. My
Yeah,
time's not scalable.
that's the hard part, right? Is that we're not scalable. And I have the same feeling about you, is if I can help someone, just, help them with anything. If we don't engage me, that's completely fine. But if there's a way to help you in your work, because a lot of people they're just shocked on what they don't know. And once they start kind of delving in, here's a perfect example. I have someone that is looking to sell their business. They're like, I'm going through diligence. I'm like, hold on, have you even thought about what that looks like? Is that something you want? No, someone just offered us and we're going to go into LOI. It's like, Okay, like, and I think that's a lot of my practice for the past 20 years is clients who do a transaction and say, okay, now help me save taxes. It's like you already started the process way too soon. But back to this boot camp, when do are are people coming to you late in the game, or should they be coming, where in their journey of starting a business, growing a business, and then even thinking about exit and forget again the trust structures and all that goes in on the back end of capturing those proceeds. Where should they be thinking about these conversations and to understand like what that next part of the journey looks like?
Yeah. We don't work with as many founders. We work with a lot of Gen 2, Gen 3, Gen 4. Um, but as I think about the conversations, it's usually 10 years before some event. Ideally, right? That's getting in front of it. That's the proactive, like, we know we need to do this. It's on the horizon. If we don't get in front of this, we're going to have issues. So let's get in front of it. Those are like, that's the best case scenario where a family is really proactive and they're saying, I want to make sure that we don't run into issues later. Um, Somebody that's calling and saying, hey, a year from now, we've got to go through succession planning is really, really difficult. It's not going to go well. There's going to be all sorts of issues as a part of that. And heaven forbid, if somebody passes away while in that leadership role, then it's really, really difficult. And frankly, Tommy, at that point, it's not an engagement for us because that is an engagement for the attorneys, the financial advisors to help sort through what's here, how do we navigate it, and ideally, the family has enough of a foundation for great communication at that point that they can navigate it effectively because all of the emotions are heightened. Everybody is sensitive about different things. And, you know, marriage and funerals bring out the best and the worst in people. And so if we're at that point, it gets tricky. But we love it when a family comes to us and says, hey, listen, we've got this pool of assets, we've got this operating company, we've got this family office. Kids have just graduated college and they're thinking about what they want to do with their life. Can you help us out? And even situations where kids are still in high school and college and we get to help them build next gen education programs and help them think through thoughtfully, how are we having the conversations? When do we have the conversations? What do those look like? What's inside of that? How are we training them to be great owners, even if they don't want to be operators in the business or in the family enterprise? Fantastic. Like, that is great because now you're arming them with the skills and the resources to be great owners, to understand this asset that they might have in the future. And they're in a position where they get to make a thoughtful decision about what they want for their life before feeling pressured to do this or do that or do that. So that's usually how this unfolds for us.
And is that work really stems from just your family and how you've attacked Sargento in terms of G3, G4 conversations? Like it's to me, it's tough. This is this, and I look at this more of as an insurance policy. To your point, of
Yeah.
you never want to make a decision because you have to or out of desperation. You want to make it from an informed, I would say, power position. And
Mm-hmm.
so part of that is that succession. And so when you talk about next gen conversations, how did you guys tackle that within your family? If you don't mind me kind of diving in a little bit there.
It was really the family participation plan. I go back to that guiding document. First of all, we were having conversations as family members about what is Sargento? What does this mean? What are the responsibilities? We had a lot of those conversations at the individual family level, um, in each family branch, and so I think my dad, his brothers, that everyone was aligned on what that looked like, and what that meant, and so they were all speaking from the same script, even if we weren't having big family meetings. Putting the family participation plan, having our board, which is comprised of independent directors and family members, those independent directors were really instrumental in helping guide the succession planning process in an objective way. And so between the family dialogue, aligning on values, having a board, having clear governance, it made that process a lot easier. And when I look at the work that we do with clients, um, there is putting the systems and the structures in place, as well as facilitating those hard conversations about, what does it take to be the leader of this business? Why should you have to have these qualifications? What does it look like to start at the bottom and grow your way up? And why is that important? And what signal does it send to everybody? So the more they can understand that, the better. And when I started doing this work, my model was Sargento. Fortunately, we were incredibly advanced in our governance, and we communicated really well as a family, and we still do. And so I had this beautiful template to sort of talk to others with. As I've done more and more of this work with a lot of families, now I've got a lot of data points and different examples that I can draw from, depending on what the family needs. And the reality is, succession planning is never linear. It's never the same. Every family is a snowflake. And so
Yes, exactly.
they're all snow. They just look different. And so that's why it's so important for us to understand who are the family members at the table. What does that system look like? What are the attributes, and how does that work? And then we can help them navigate that in a better way.
And that plan isn't it's not evergreen in the manner that it's untouched, because you're going from a generation of first cousins working together,
Yeah.
next generation second cousins, and so as you get further from the original root of your grandfather, it does become complicated because you're having more branches
Yes.
within branches that are being created. So as part
Yeah.
of this plan, how I'm assuming that there's got to be a big component of this that's evergreen, but a sliver that is specific to the current generation
Yes.
that you guys are.
Well, and this family participation plan that we keep talking about, I refer to it as the original plan. We have since updated that, and I've got a meeting later this week with our independent board members to talk about what we call the professional development committee subcommittee of the board that's focused on the implementation of that shareholder participation plan. So we have it. We took a lot of that base that we had from 25 years ago, but we updated it, to your point, around a new generation and what are they experiencing, and a lot of the stuff the assumptions that we had 25, 30 years ago no longer hold. So what needs to be updated along the way? I had to have an MBA if I was going to be an officer of the company. That's not a mandate for the next generation. If their role in the organization mandates an MBA, then they need to go get one. But it's so we've made tweaks along the way, and I think as I work with clients, I think um, the cycle that we kind of look at is every year there's a family meeting, whether that's in the form of a shareholder meeting, family council, a family meeting, a family retreat. Every year there's something that brings everybody together to talk about family, to be family, to, if we go back to that former model, to be in the family room. We're not talking business. We're not talking ownership. We're talking about kids and activities and hobbies and just loving each other. Then a part of that family meeting is also up in the top rooms, that ownership board and management room. And depending on what you're talking about, it can vary. But having that on an annual basis is really important. Then I think every 5 years, looking at the governance and saying, is this still sound? Does this still work? What changes do we have to make? Why do we have to make those changes? What's the process going to be, and how are we going to have the conversation around those changes? So there's a lot that goes into just evaluating that governance to make sure that you've got the right buy-in, that you're thinking about it the right way, the right people are at the table. There's a lot that goes into it, but it does need to be refreshed. And ideally, Tommy, the evergreen nature of those plans is the why, the deep why. The things that matter most to us aren't changing. It's just sort of the technical dynamic of where we are as a family is changing, and so we need to update it for a new time.
Yeah. And this work is in parallel with the actual operations of the business, right? And so this is, I would say, layered on top of the business. So a lot of this conversation,
Yeah.
though it impacts the business, is it impacting day-to-day operations. This is another, I would say, full-time commitment job from a family perspective on top of the business. And I think because what I want people to hear from the message you're
Yeah.
saying is that there's got to be intent to in the purpose
Yeah.
to this work, and the business is going to continue to operate on a day-to-day basis. This is just an added level of, again, back to insurance. This is an insurance plan that's going to protect the long-term sustainability of
Correct.
this business because of the family.
Well, and the reality is, for many of these families who are operating in that enterprise, whether that's the office or the operating company, they've got CEO jobs, responsibilities. One of the reasons, I think people end up bringing us on for a host of reasons, but one of them is we just keep the process moving. This process will get stuck unless family members are dedicated to moving it forward. It is one of these things that's important but not urgent until it's important and urgent, and then it's usually too late. So being able to keep pushing this process forward is really important, and it is time consuming. And it's interesting, the decisions that the family makes, the owners make about what they want for the business directly impacts the strategic planning process and what's happening on the ground in the organization. So while it's sort of detached and removed, it has to get plugged into the broader enterprise, because the decisions that we make about the liquidity needs that we might want as owners from this asset, if I say I want 90% of the proceeds coming back to my family, we got to make sure management knows that they're only going to get 10%, and you need to operate that platform with 10%, not 100%. And so it changes the dynamic that's happening up there, and that's why it's so important. We see it all the time. If family members haven't had a conversation about what they want from the enterprise, it's really difficult to translate and to build a strategic plan. To where a lot of conflict comes, because it's like, well, I thought we were going to do this. No, I thought we were going to do this. Like, if the family members haven't agreed, then management is trying to figure out, what do we do on a day-to-day basis? What are the metrics? What are those KPIs of success if you guys haven't told me what you actually want? So that alignment is, people often talk like, what's the ROI of this work? Well, I don't know what the ROI of this work is. You get ideally a happy family, and you're able to articulate to management, here's where we want to go, run. And when they have that clarity and they know the rules of the game for how they're supposed to operate that asset, it can accelerate decisions. There's less conflict between the management team, less conflict between the family and the management team. It creates a ton of clarity. And again, it goes back to setting expectations for everybody. Once they have those expectations, they can go. And that's good for business.
Yeah. And so let me ask you, so a lot of the work that I do with families, they do a shared service model where they leverage the C-suite of their operating business for personal needs, right? And so you start blurring that line where yes, you want 90% liquidity coming out of the business, and the C-suite saying, hold on, we're helping you, we see why you want to do it, but you're really handicapping us over here. And so is it wise for families as soon as they possibly can to bifurcate those processes and have a separate dedicated team looking at, like you said, this is an asset on their personal balance sheet, and we have to look at it in that manner, because the operating executives are there to optimize the business, and they can't be on both sides, because then as a family member you're getting unbiased, or a bit more, I'm sorry, biased, conflict of advice. And so do you see that successful families who go through the succession have intentionally bifurcated those decision and those I would say rules of engagement, because you can't have it both ways? And it's a hard conversation for me. Everyone's like, I trust this guy for 30, 40 years. He's been with me to grow this business. And the hardest part for me in terms of educating families is that you might not be getting the best of both. And so you have to split. So what do you...
Yeah, that bifurcation of it, we had that internally. We were using our tax team for everything. We decided to carve this out and start a family office. And for us, it was not about shared investments and pooled liquidity and so on and so forth. It was really around tax strategy, estate planning, so on and so forth. And we looked at it from a few different angles. One is that dedication of employee time. Like, it's really confusing when you're head of tax, you're asking him to be head of tax for an enterprise. And by the way, hey, I've got a question over here about this tax issue or this tax issue. When you have family members swarming them, how unfair? How unfair to that individual who is stuck managing family expectations, business expectations. Like, that doesn't work. You wouldn't want that happening to you. So what, like, but yet we do that all the time. So this embedded family office, well, natural, normal, common, everything else, does get challenging both for the family and the individual, because the family member is disappointed that they can't get the attention they want from that individual. The corporation's disappointed because they're not getting the same level of attention. I mean, what a difference. So clarifying all of that is really important. Whether you set up an individual family office or not, is a completely different question that has to be explored from a number of different angles. But I think it is really important to dedicate resources to what they're there for. And when you start to pull from both sides, it does get challenging for everybody. And everyone's going to be slightly disappointed in one way, shape, or form, and that's just not good. And the reality is, if you have a successful enterprise, and you've got great talent that you recruited to come in to do a job in that enterprise, let them do the job. And then find the team outside, whether that's building the team or finding the right MFO or just hiring the local tax advisors to help you navigate that stuff. I think that's the way to go. I think that's the way to go.
I would agree. I would agree. Is that to help me in my business? It's just I've seen the torture these families go through when they're getting conflicting advice, and sometimes it's, again, very biased. And so before we wrap up, I just wanted to just give you an opportunity to talk more about things that are personal to you and other initiatives that you're working on that you might want to share with the audience.
Yeah, things that are important to me. My one of the things that I'm really passionate about is curiosity, and I talk a lot about curiosity. And I think one of the things that makes some families wildly successful as family members and as enterprise leaders is being curious, and curious about yourself and why you're feeling what you're feeling, why you're operating the way you're operating, as well as being curious about others. And it's interesting. It's one of my slides when we're working with families is what makes a successful family enterprise or business family. It's being curious. And so I'm working on some stuff around curiosity because I think it's just really, really important to families and to individuals. So.
And then my last question is, and again, thanks for sharing that, because again, I agree with, purpose, curiosity, all those characteristics of individuals, bring out the best in people. And just for this is always the hardest one for me with families. G2 and beyond have concerns with how G1 is ignoring succession.
Mm-hmm.
Flip side, G1 is looking at G2 saying, you have no idea what you're looking to step into. Like, help each other in this last few minutes, like, come to a place without engaging you or me and say, have that conversation at the simplest level. Do they need someone in the room in those initial conversations? Or is there some small steps they can do as a family unit to kind of at least break the ice?
I'm going to go back to curiosity. I don't think you necessarily, many families need an outside advisor. But I think being curious about why is Gen 1, why is the leading generation concerned about the succeeding generation? And what's going on there? What are those fears? Being able to tap into that underlying motivation and fear is really, really important, because it may be that leading generation, that, let's call it dad, just wants to make sure that the kids don't fail. Not because he's worried about anything. He just, like, he loves his kids. And so he wants to make sure that they don't fail. So, like, let's understand that. It isn't that he's not willing to let go. He just he wants to make sure that you're okay. Right. And so, and then on the next gen, it's like, okay, well, what's going on? Like, what do they need? What do they want? What's really driving them? Where are their insecurities? Like, being curious about each other, I think, is the start to unlocking amazing conversations about what's really happening and clarifying the unknown. And once you have that and it's all on the table, now we can play with it. Now we can build structures around how do we make sure that the kids don't fail? How do we build structures around making sure that dad has something to do and that there's a role for dad? Like, it's just understanding what those are. And if you can do that, it's really powerful.
That's key words of wisdom there. No, I completely agree. So, hey Josh, it was fun. I appreciate you jumping on.
Thank
Again,
you.
this
Thanks
all
for having
started
me.
from me taking a look at an article and reposting it and us connecting.
Sure.
And so definitely the work you do is so refreshing. Um, because in the world that we're in, it's just sometimes hard to find good people doing good work and
Yeah.
serving people like you're doing. So Josh, have a
Likewise.
great day. I appreciate everything for jumping on.
Thanks, Tommy. Appreciate it.